Batman. You can't deny that your brother Superman attracted Zod, and the two of them fought to almost destroy half of the metropolis. Countless people died in that disaster. Do you want to see that list of casualties that could drown people? David. He was adopted. Flash. Why don't you stand up like your brother and lead the heroes to the front line to protect the world? David. I don't have the strength he has. Wonder Woman. Are you referring to Superman being punched away by Darkseid, and you going up and using a set of military punches to defeat the Dark Lord? Traveling through the world of DC, David discovered that he had become the newborn son of Superman's adoptive parents, and was given the template to defeat the Tyrant upon birth. And as long as it affects the emotions of the plot characters, it can accelerate the fusion of templates and open new ones. Hebelong template. Load, Million Star Sentinel template. Load. The Celestial Clan Judge Arithmus template, the Complete Phoenix Power template, the Golden Planet Devourer template. Keywords of the novel. Superman's Brothers Me, but I received the No Pop-Up template. Superman's Brothers Me, but I received the Complete TXT template download. Superman's Brothers Me, but I received the latest chapter reading of the Annihilation template. 1. Chapter 1 is My Mother Martha. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 is My Mother Martha. The air is as fresh and clean as on the first day of creation. The gentle breeze, like the hand of God, brushes gently over the golden wheat fields. On a cool autumn night, a red pickup truck is slowly driving on the road in the suburbs of Kansas. The endless wheat fields on both sides of the road echoed with the sound of praising life, and fireflies danced leisurely like stars. The night sky above is filled with stars. The melodious music of the car radio, combined with the familiar scent of the fields and the fresh scent of the soil after rain, fills the car. Jonathan Kent, who had just become a father, reached out the window and felt the shape of the wind, his mouth curved with happiness that couldn't be concealed. Jonathan, this is a gift from God to us. My wife Martha left the hospital shortly after giving birth, with a slightly pale face. However, looking at the cute and quiet child in her arms, as if she were looking at the most precious treasure in the world, her eyes were filled with a strong love that could not be dissolved. Her voice was slightly hoarse but contained tenderness. I long to have a child, and soon he's like an angel born. A gift from God. My mother's name is Martha. Looking at his mother, David, who had become a baby, still couldn't believe what had happened and felt a little helpless in his heart. After waking up, I turned into a baby. My mother's name is Martha and my father's name is Jonathan Kent. Not only that, but also being born in a hospital called Metropolitan Hospital, it goes without saying what it means to travel to the dark world of DC and become the son of Superman's adoptive parents. Of course, this is God's promise that he will grow up healthy and strong. Looking at his wife through the rearview mirror, Jonathan smiled and spoke halfway through. Boom boom. Meteorites from the distant universe suddenly cut through the night, and a bright red flame illuminated half of the sky. Meteorites of all sizes hit the earth like rain, splashing rocks, some even flying towards the small town behind them. A meteorite falling from the center of the meteorite cluster, like the finger of God, swiftly swept across the road ahead, forming a valley of fate that prevented the whereabouts of this couple. Oh my goodness! Jonathan quickly braked, and the tires rubbed hard against the road, emitting a burnt smell. The car rolled sideways, barely falling into the ditch. He immediately turned around to look. Martha, are you and the child okay? It's okay, Jonathan. Martha quickly hugged the child with her body as she braked, and the baby in her arms was fine. The son of Krypton accompanied the meteorite as scheduled and landed on Earth. The Earth trembles, its ears roar. Even with such a loud noise, the baby in my arms does not cry or make a fuss. It is quiet and lovely, with pink and fair skin, just blinking bright eyes and looking out. Jonathan, look at our child, he's not afraid at all. Martha's eyes lit up in surprise. Such an unusual performance, this child is indeed a gift from God. Looking out, David was not afraid, his heart was filled with anticipation. Detected the birth of the host and started loading the extermination template. He recalled when he was first born, an emotionless electronic voice rang in his ear. After being born, David obtained the destroyer template and possessed a strong eternal clan physique. But at the beginning, only 30% was fused, and to accelerate fusion, emotional points are needed. Emotional points are accumulated and obtained by influencing the emotions of individuals in the DC world who have high strength or hold a significant role in the world's destiny. He has already gained some emotional points from his spouse before. But the arrival of the son of Krypton is the beginning. Through the car window, David's eyes lit up as if searching for a huge gold mine, searching for the smoke outside. Who else in the DC world is more popular and powerful than Superman? And once the template is 100% integrated, the next template will be opened. What is that? Upon hearing his wife's voice, Jonathan did not turn his head and instead squinted his eyes to be drawn to a hard, pitch-black blurry outline in the smoke. "Martha, stay in the car with your child and don't get off." Worried about the danger, he sternly warned his wife and walked out of the car alone to check the situation. The meteorite's Mars is still burning like candles on the ground, illuminating the darkness. When Jonathan saw something in the smoke and dust, he widened his eyes and froze in place. "Jonathan! Jonathan! What did you see sitting in the car?" she called twice but her husband didn't answer. Martha got off the car with her child in her arms and came to his side, feeling uneasy. Immediately after, she also froze in surprise. Plowing the road and turning over the soil, a pitch-black spaceship resembling a baby's cradle, made of unknown metal, the size of a pickup truck, lay quietly at the end of a deep ditch. The transparent cabin door had already been opened, and a cute baby with curly hair sat inside, with blue eyes and lively legs bouncing. Faced with this beautiful and peculiar world, she smiled naively and curiously at the couple. "Martha, let's get out of here." Jonathan regained his senses, hesitated for a moment, swallowed his saliva with a hint of urgency, and took his wife and children to leave. Since ancient times, people have always looked up at the stars and wanted to know if humans are lonely in the universe. Now there is an answer to the question, and aliens look similar to humans. The official personnel will come over soon. This matter will definitely be tightly sealed off. I don't want us to get involved in this trouble. Leaving. David was stunned and surprised. By the way, Superman's adoptive parents adopted him because his wife Martha was extremely eager for a child. Now the child has it, it's him. So, is Superman going to be gone? What would Superman become without this incredibly kind couple being picked up and raised? Was taken away by the military and transformed into an experimental superhero in a manga version that had been invisible for over a decade and was as thin as a bone. This is not possible. Not to mention how many crises that have destroyed the world have been solved by Superman as he grows up. Without Superman, where would he find such a big mine again? No, perhaps God is particularly kind to us, Jonathan. At this moment, looking at the lovely child in the spaceship, Martha, who had just become a mother, felt an impulse filling her brain, instinctively unwilling to leave the child here, with a hesitant expression on her face. He has sent us more than one angel. Martha! Jonathan exclaimed in surprise. Think about how the official people will treat this child after they arrive. She was not unaware of the trouble inside, and kind-hearted Martha turned her head with an unbearable look in her eyes, trying to persuade her husband. Being tightly imprisoned in a cold laboratory, without parental care, toys, or care, growing up through continuous sampling experiments. Stop talking, Martha. Jonathan covered his forehead with a headache in a dilemma. He had the same kindness as his wife, but Just as he hesitated, David in Martha's arms stretched out his swaddle with a short, chubby, and tender arm, waving at the Kryptonian sun in the swaddle and giggling, as if he liked him very much. "Did you see it, Jonathan?" Martha's eyes lit up, her tone was pleasantly surprised, and she found another powerful argument to persuade her husband. "Our child seems to like him very much and is asking us to adopt him." 2 votes for 1 vote. Watching his son's reaction, Jonathan struggled for a moment and pretended to be helpless, raising his hand. "Okay, what else can I say?" He gently kissed his wife, looked at his cute and lively son, and then looked at the lonely baby in the spacecraft, sighing. 2 children, the farm will be busy next year. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. A trace of original flavor from destroying the Overlord. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. A trace of original flavor from destroying the Overlord. Come down for breakfast, David. Mother Martha's urging call came from downstairs. "You and Clark are almost late for school." Immediately, Mother. In the morning, golden sunlight poured into the house through the window, and David, who had just finished washing, responded by changing into his pajamas. A head of pitch-black short hair, with deep and 3-dimensional facial features, a slender and tall body, revealing refined muscles when clothes are taken off, giving people a clean and steady feeling, reminiscent of a quietly standing ancient Greek sculpture. Unfortunately. Arriving in front of the mirror, David clenched his palm, his high-density alloy bones and muscles tensed and exerted force, comparable to the terrifying force of a volcanic eruption surging within his body. The skin on the body quickly turned purple, and the chin showed rigid lines resembling large grooves, invisibly adding a touch of majesty. In the mirror, it was like a silent king gazing quietly. The progress of the EP1-10 fusion template has been on the rise, but once too much force is applied, the condition of skin tone highlighting has not improved. Template fusion progress. 81% watching the progress. As I stopped exerting force, my skin gradually faded and I put on my clothes. He walked down the stairs with a hint of helplessness on his face. "What is this?" "Keep a trace of the original flavor, only then do you know that the fusion is the destruction template, however, at least not as tall as EP1, with a pair of bean eyes and a bald head like a purple potato." David touched the hair on his head and felt a sigh in his heart. He couldn't bear the hairstyle of a strong person who was only in high school. Ding! The crisp sound of a bread maker. In the living room on the first floor, the aroma of toasted bread seeped into my nose. Da-da-da. David had just come downstairs when there was a lively sound of footsteps behind him. "Good morning, David." Leaving his younger brother, Clark, who was tall and had a pair of deep blue eyes, came to the living room. Feeling a bit thirsty, he casually opened the refrigerator and looked back. "Do you want a few sips of milk to refresh yourself?" As he spoke, he took out a large glass bottle of milk and took 2 sips into the bottle. David frowned and walked towards the dining table, ignoring this foolish brother. "Don't drink like this, Clark." Mother Martha quickly walked over and grabbed the cold milk in her hand. "The milk just taken out of the refrigerator tastes better," said the future Superman, who was only a young man in his 17 or 18 years, raising his hand and laughing. "What about the upbringing in our family, Clark?" Martha, who had just finished her busy breakfast, said with a headache. Over the course of more than a decade, a few wrinkles quietly climbed up the corner of this mother's eyes. "Sit down and have breakfast, David. You won't be able to catch the school bus soon." "Good afternoon, 2 dozing insects." Jonathan, a rough man who had just finished feeding the cows on the farm, came into the house and took off his coat soaked in hay, laying it on the sofa. He took the milk from his wife's hand and naturally took 2 sips, commenting on his 2 newly born sons. "The movements are almost identical to those of Clark just now." "Okay, I know where your upbringing went." Upon seeing this scene, Martha covered her forehead. "I remember after changing to a new sofa, my mother said to let you finish feeding cows in the morning and pat yourself outside before entering the house, father." Taking the bottle from his father's hand, he poured a glass of milk, and David took a bite of the hot bread, neither too fast nor too slow. The living room sofa is stained with some grass from the coat. Next time, make sure to remember. Jonathan, who was accustomed to rough hands and feet, turned around and looked at his wife with a slight awkwardness. At the dining table, he pulled out his chair and sat down, coughing twice and speaking seriously. Actually, I think it was a mistake when we chose this fabric sofa that was not easy to clean. You know, we live on a farm. There's finally someone like me in this Kent family. Gentle Martha didn't get angry because the sofa was dirty. She held down her little son's shoulder, who was speaking for her, and happily raised an eyebrow at the two of them. Clark touched his forehead and covered his face, unable to deny that he was born on a farm and, like his father, did not pay much attention to home hygiene, while his younger brother David was more careful. Helplessness from Superman Clark +3. David didn't even lift his eyelids as he brushed through the information flow in front of him, and then took a bite of the bread. It has to be said that it is precisely because he grew up with Clark, who is a mobile gold mine, that his destruction template fused so quickly, possessing a power that ordinary people cannot imagine today. In terms of time, for the Kent couple, David was the one who came first. But before reaching Earth, the son of Krypton traveled through the universe for a period of time, clearly looking older than David, who was only a few days old. So the son of Krypton became his brother, and David became his youngest son. What are you looking at, Clark? Martha sat down to take a sip of milk, and when she saw her eldest son wandering over a piece of paper while eating, she couldn't help but smile as if she was lost in a beautiful imagination. Permission bar. Clark was a bit flustered trying to put away the note. What's the permission note? Father Jonathan paused as he picked up the jam knife. The school rugby team will have a selection in the afternoon. David, who is in the same class as Clark at the same school, added casually. He doesn't say it, but his honest Kryptonian brother will also speak truthfully when facing his beloved foster parents. Clark. Upon hearing that it was a selection for the rugby team, the atmosphere at the dinner table changed slightly and suddenly fell silent. Only David was still eating casually. The couple exchanged a glance, and Martha hesitated to speak. What's wrong? Father, you also played rugby on the school team before. Clark, who wanted to join the rugby team, felt uneasy and looked at the father of the head of the family. But you're different, Clark. We are all aware of this. Jonathan became somewhat serious and tried to tone down his teenage son as much as possible. After carrying the spaceship with a pickup truck and carrying Clark home, the couple once wondered if the little baby they found was really an alien. The appearance is exactly the same as that of the Earth people. There is no horn on the head, no tail behind, and no strange skin color. When you were a child, you could lift a pickup truck with one hand. Until one day when Clark was 7 years old, he was repairing a car on the farm when the jack tilted and saw a car weighing over a ton about to fall. On the side, naive Clark showed unimaginable strength to lift the car, like lifting a plastic dinosaur toy and moving it aside. However, Jonathan, who was shocked beyond measure and widened his eyes, did not see it. His biological son on the other side of the car reached out his hand even faster. Clark also didn't notice, because things weighing over a ton were too light for the two of them. On the court, I will try my best to gather my strength. Staring at his parents, Clark earnestly promised to control his strength and not let himself harm others, hoping to impress his father. The charm of sports lies in the exhilarating confrontation with others and surpassing oneself. At the dinner table, David suddenly pretended to be puzzled and said, "I don't quite understand, my dear brother. Especially in rugby, which is American football, there is intense physical confrontation and players need to rush back and forth on the field holding the ball. What can you experience from joining the rugby school team? Compared to the young son of Krypton, the body of an Earthling is almost shattered with just a touch of glass. On the court, he may have to focus all his attention on carefully controlling his strength. Father, I promise to be careful." Listening to his younger brother's affectionate words making his parents look suspicious, Clark felt very depressed. It must be because other families love their younger son, while their family is unusually more concerned about their eldest son. His younger brother always treats him unfairly and even says it's for his good. I know you will, but what if something unexpected happens? It was precisely because he had played rugby that Jonathan learned that the rugby field was constantly running and colliding. How can an elephant ensure that every time it collides with a kitten, it does not harm it while running wildly? As always, feeling the seriousness and determination contained in his father's soothing words, Clark was defeated in a dejected manner. It's always like this, every time I speak, it's like if how else can he refute this? Father, I've had enough. Young Clark became more and more frustrated as he thought, and his voice grew a bit excited. Having had enough to avoid all activities, I could only sit quietly in the corner of the campus and read, unable to do anything. I can be more popular like everyone else. Thank you for your collection and reading. I will make the most of the time to organize the plot. After signing the contract, we will start 2 updates a day. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Fear at 17 years old. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Fear at 17 years old. Clark suddenly revealed his long-suppressed feelings, and the couple didn't know what to say to comfort them. Son. This topic has been present in this family for a long time. They hope their son can hide themselves and do not want the government to suddenly come and take their son away one day. But adolescent students crave attention on campus, and those who have come through this stage also understand this mood. I finished eating, let's go first. The atmosphere at the dinner table was dull, and David was not very interested in the cliché topic at home. With a slight movement of his ears, he looked out the window and stood up as if nothing had happened. He picked up his backpack and left. From Clark's excitement +9, depression +7. I have gained a big wave of emotional points from my dear brother again. Shoo. David just strolled outside the farm. The school bus stopped in front of him at the right time, without any difference. Hi, David. Boarding the school bus, there were men and women on the bus, chatting and laughing, with youthful and energetic faces that belonged to high school students. A few of them greeted David. Nodding as a response, I found a back seat to sit down. David turned his head to leisurely gaze at the scenery outside the window. The sky is as blue as a wash, white clouds float slowly like cotton balls, and the green grassland stretches endlessly, connecting to the dense forest in the distance, making people feel peaceful in their hearts. The only advantage of this rural town called Smallville, located in Kansas, may be that it is remote and backward, with most of its natural scenery preserved and fresh air. The school bus briefly stops and starts again. Where's Clark? David. A crisp and lively girl's voice came from the other seat, slightly puzzled. Although the two brothers don't get tired of being together all day, there won't be anyone missing when they go to school in the morning. In the back, David said casually, you don't have to look back to know who it is. Chloe, with short golden hair and a fair face, always unconsciously squints her eyes and reveals her tiger teeth when she smiles. She exudes a touch of cuteness amidst her quirky personality, and enjoys exploring and discovering various strange and interesting things. She is a journalist and editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. She sat in her seat, gazing at the Kent family farm, wanting to know what had happened. It's not uncommon for high school students in their adolescence to argue with their parents on a daily basis. You won't be interested. David's tone was tinged with a hint of boredom. Here you go again, don't keep making you look like an adult, David. Upon hearing these words, Pete, a slightly short and somewhat comical-looking black man sitting next to Chloe, threw a knowing look and smiled. This will make you look very unsociable, girls don't like this one. On campus, the Kent brothers are famous for not liking various activities. Clark's appearance is tall and shy, not good at speaking, like an honest scalper. In other people's impression, David prefers to be quiet and alone, does not like to interact with people, and has a slightly withdrawn personality mixed with a hint of mystery. It seems that Clark won't be able to catch the school bus today. Chloe turned around and joked as he continued the conversation. If it weren't for you being born on a farm, the rumor in school that you were a vampire born in the Renaissance era and usually spent alone in a castle would have been circulating long ago. David and Chloe got to know each other well, mainly because they were one of Clark's few close friends, and they got to know each other one after another. Looking out the window, David remained non-committal about it. Revived once, even though the body is affected by various hormones, there are still some attitudes from adolescence, but it is definitely different from impulsive teenagers. For example, his Kryptonian brother Clark. Kryptonians also have adolescence. With a sigh in his heart, David's gaze turned to the front seat of the school bus, a couple of passionate men and women who were talking, laughing, and having ambiguous movements. Lana Lon, with smooth black hair and a slightly upturned nose, is beautiful and good-looking. She is the captain of the school cheerleading team, although not the hot and outgoing type. She is loved and secretly loved by countless men in school. And her handsome boyfriend with blonde hair, it's not surprising that the football team captain and cheerleader, who shine brightly like stars in school, are dating. He complained roast. To be honest, if Clark, who is shy when talking to girls, could pry Lana out of Whitney's hand. I will have the headline for the next issue of the Torch newspaper. Seeing David's gaze, Chloe chuckled and said, but we all know that's impossible. It is generally impossible to hide a crush on someone, and Clark's crush on Lana, as his friends around him, although she and Pete didn't say it, all saw this. After all, whether in class or off, a boy often gets distracted and looks at a girl. When he talks to her, he becomes extremely nervous and at a loss. What else can be the reason for this? As a family member who grew up together for over a decade, if Clark truly loved rugby, David would support him. Unfortunately, the young Superman was blinded by hormones. Clark wants to join rugby and play glass bumping, mainly because Lana's boyfriend Whitney is the captain of the rugby team. I want to learn from others and shine on the rugby field, winning the attention and gaze of those I secretly love. It's really green and astringent. David shook his head secretly. It seems that if nothing unexpected happens, Clark's plan to join the rugby team has fallen through, right? Putting aside the smirk of his pitiful crush on Clark, Pete, who had become serious, glanced around and leaned in to ask in a low voice. David, what about you? I've already said that I don't plan on joining the rugby team. He showed no interest in carefully controlling his strength and playing house to house with the generally rude and arrogant gorilla like rugby players in school. But this is the only way. Pete's eyes showed a hint of fear. What's the solution? Chloe wondered. Pete, why did you suddenly speak in such a low voice? Like a thief, avoiding something in fear. What are you talking about? You're a girl, you don't know, Chloe. Peering at the playing rugby team members sitting in front, as if afraid they might turn around at any moment, Pete nervously swallowed his saliva. We want to avoid becoming unlucky scarecrows. Scarecrow. This is a tradition of the school rugby team. Before the big game starts, the team will paint a person's chest with Smavels S and hang them up like a scarecrow. David explained with a smile. It's like some kind of morale-boosting ceremony before the army goes on an expedition. A group of young, bold, and carefree guys. It seems that I have underestimated the level of brutality of rugby players. Chloe frowned, his expression indescribable. That's why Clark and I want to join the school team. Even if we guard clothes and deliver water, they won't mess with themselves, said Pete, a slightly shorter black man. He cast a warning and persuasion glance at David. You can still laugh, David. If Clark doesn't pass, it's very likely that this time the target will be one of your brothers. This is not nonsense to scare. American campuses are like this, where students who excel in sports are the focus of attention. No matter how well a nerd learns, they are also a nerd who prioritizes being bullied. A pair of farm-born and academically outstanding, nerd, brothers have a good reputation on campus. You know. The matter with Clark may lead Whitney to have you, Clark's brother, undergo surgery. Stupid Clark. David rolled his eyes secretly when he mentioned this matter. Clark thought his secret love for Lana was well hidden, but anyone who had some contact with the two of them could see this, including Lana's boyfriend. Despite being perceived by outsiders as dull, shy, and inarticulate, the young Superman is the least popular among boys, but with a tall and robust physique and handsome appearance, it still poses a threat to sexual performance. Especially when Lana has a boyfriend, her attitude towards Clark is subtly different from others. There is a risk of turning green on her head, and as Whitney, who is accustomed to being a celebrity on campus, it is difficult not to feel jealous. On this side, Pete whispered and persuaded David to join the rugby team together. Whitney, who was chatting with his girlfriend, either coincidentally or vaguely heard his name. He glanced back while joking, paused on David for a moment, and without hiding his coldness, turned back. "Are you really looking for me?" Seeing this scene, David raised his eyebrows and froze for a moment. Is he starting to be afraid now? At the age of 17, with a strong physique, am I afraid of classmates' violence? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Clark, I'm too embarrassed to expose you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Clark, I'm too embarrassed to expose you. My parents still haven't agreed to the request to join the rugby team selection. Clark walked out with his backpack on his back, looking dejected. On the dirt road in front of the farm, the tire marks were clearly crushed, and by this time the school bus was probably approaching the school. You can't show any abnormalities in front of people, but as long as no one sees it, it's okay. Clark lifted his backpack at the corner of his mouth, his body flickered and disappeared in place, rushing into the sprawling cornfield at a speed faster than the bullets coming out of the barrel, creating a strong wave of air. From the sky, the green waves were quickly separated as pointed by Moses' cane. Shoo! Except for the middle school bus driver who chatted with a person whose car broke down halfway and asked if they needed any help, it took some time. The school bus drove smoothly all the way and stopped in front of the small town high school gate on time. The students gradually got off the school bus and walked towards the campus in twos and threes. Getting off the car, David glanced at a sign with a meteorite pattern in the distance, weathered by wind and rain, old and faded. Welcome to Smallville Town. The global meteorite capital. More than a decade ago, a meteorite shower landed in this small town, bringing both disaster and opportunity. The people in the small town are trying to seize the selling point of the meteorite city to become a tourist destination and make the town develop. However, looking at the road that can be crossed in just a few steps on the main road of the town, and the low buildings visible everywhere, it is not difficult to know the result. David withdrew his gaze and casually walked towards the campus in spring, where cherry blossoms were blooming. The capital of meteorites, some Clark will suffer in the future. The so-called meteorite is the kryptonite that descended on Earth with the spacecraft of the son of Krypton. As is well known, kryptonite is Superman's fatal weakness. Once touched, it can cause pain and weakness in the short term, and fatal death in the long term. A small green stone can make the human god with enough power to move the continental plate kneel powerless on the ground. As he grew up, he paid a little attention to the abundance of kryptonite in this small town. To exaggerate, he might even be able to kick out two pieces while walking on the road. I believe that various villains who oppose Superman in the future will not have to worry about where to find kryptonite. Chloe and Pete got off the car, the two of them caught up, and the three of them walked towards the campus together. Hi, good morning, Chloe, Pete. Wearing jeans and a classic thick blue checkered shirt, Clark appeared out of nowhere, holding a few books and trying to disguise himself as having arrived long ago, greeting the two of them. Didn't David say you were behind? Chloe's strange radar was activated, looking puzzled. Clark, who missed the school bus, arrived at school earlier than them. I took a shortcut and set off long ago, David didn't see it. Clark remembered David's words in the morning that made his plan come to naught. Although there was no reminder from David and it was unlikely to get his parents' consent, he still hugged David's shoulder in displeasure, laughing and scolding his brother who had become expressionless. You know, David never really cares about me. Really, the two of them doubted anything and looked at David. They remembered David clearly asking his parents for their consent on Clark's early morning selection for the rugby team, encountering some difficulties, and determined to fight for it. Whatever. With a clap of Clark's hand, David walked towards the campus first. He began to consider whether he should pick out a small piece of the kryptonite he had collected before and carry it with him, so as not to lie to any Kryptonian son again next time. Clark, who had just caused trouble, breathed a slight sigh of relief. What sets him apart from ordinary people is that as a family member who spends time together, David is clear about it. Others don't know how he did it, David definitely knows. Fortunately, David didn't reveal it as expected, but on the other hand, his younger brother has always been very mature. Looking at his younger brother's back, Clark smiled at the corner of his mouth. Even if one discovers that his older brother is incredibly powerful and faster than his voice, as his younger brother, he is ordinary and has never experienced any imbalance in his heart. However, this anomaly does not bring much benefit. Thinking of this, his eyebrows drooped again. Shoo. Suddenly, Clark's strength was instantly drained, and he felt weak and uncomfortable. He couldn't stand steadily and fell to the ground, with books scattered all over the ground. Whitney hugged his girlfriend Lana and passed by, casting a contemptuous look. Lana saw him fall and took the initiative to stop and help him pick up the book. She glanced at the book in her hand and smiled. So Zarathustra said, Nietzsche. Clark, do you think you're an ordinary person or a superhero? Upon hearing the sound, David turned around and glanced. My eyes scanned Lana's fair chest, where a green crystal necklace was hanging. I don't know. Turning his head, he dared not face the kryptonite necklace. Clark looked a bit uncomfortable and stuttered in his mouth. Lana's Superman does not refer to the hero code after Clark. The philosophy proposed by philosopher Nietzsche regarding the definition of a powerful human is to name a person who is not bound by secular rules and moral constraints, transcends oneself, transcends ordinary people, has strong creativity, and a strong will as Superman. Say kryptonite has arrived. Sympathetically touching his chin, David temporarily gave up the idea of carrying kryptonite with him in the future. The future Superman is already miserable enough. Faced with the dream lover, due to the kryptonite necklace, he cannot even speak freely with the other person. Every time the person he secretly loves appears, it is often when he is in a difficult situation. Let's go. Seeing his girlfriend and Clark taking the initiative to talk, Whitney's jealousy turned on him. However, due to not doing anything in front of his girlfriend, he kissed Lana, hugged his shy girlfriend, and left behind an embarrassed figure picking up a book on the ground. David. The sound of footsteps came, and Clark looked up and saw David walking over. His eyes lit up as he thought his younger brother was going to help him pick up books. It's really miserable, Clark. Throwing down a sentence, David shook his head and left. Faced with the mockery of his younger brother deliberately turning back, Clark was so angry that he was filled with smoke. After picking up the books, the four of them walked into the building. In the hallway, next to the storage cabinet, hormonal restless men and women were chatting enthusiastically, making every move to showcase their charm, conquer the opposite sex in front of them, and agree to their invitation. Spring has arrived. Feeling the atmosphere in the school, David sighed. Are you referring to the upcoming spring dance party, David? Chloe blinked and asked, do you have a dance partner? David has never been interested in such things. Peter shrugged and invited, why don't you be my dance partner, Chloe, as a pure friend? Let's gather some company, so that the two of us don't have to be too embarrassed at the ball. What about you, Clark? The four of them walked into the classroom while chatting. After studying all morning, school ended at noon. David, you're going home alone today, Clark asked David to go home first, as if there was something serious going on. I'm going to the playground to accompany Pete in the selection and give him encouragement. Accompany Pete. Glancing up and down at him, David sneered at the words. I'm too embarrassed to expose you, Clark. After saying these words, ignoring Clark's flushed face and eager to argue, he thrust into his pocket and turned around to leave gracefully. Get on the school bus. David looked at the scenery outside the window. What needs to be seen when Pete participates in the selection? Clark just has a crush on her, using this excuse to watch Lana and her team practice cheerleading on the playground. He can only comment on this, finding himself uncomfortable. On the playground, there were not only cheerleading teams, but also football teams, filled with dog food and vinegar, waiting for Clark. In the school bus, Chloe sat next to her, quietly writing on her backpack. The article is in line with her usual style, with sharp language, and is about the rugby team. Rugby. Sports or Savage, to be published in the school newspaper. On the bridge, there are few vehicles coming and going, and the school bus driver is driving quickly and smoothly. I didn't notice where the car broke down on the asphalt road ahead in the morning, with a broken steel part lying there. Shit. The school bus, which was originally running smoothly, suddenly had its tires punctured and deflated. Bang. The car skidded uncontrollably, and it was too late to turn the steering wheel forcefully. The school bus crashed into the guardrail of the bridge under the driver's frightened expression and rushed off the bridge. The school bus flies in mid-air. Ah! Suddenly losing weight and lifting up, everyone in the car screamed in surprise. David's face changed. Before these high school students could finish screaming, the school bus plunged into the water, causing huge splashes of water. Gudong dong dong. A heavy school bus weighing over 10 tons quickly sank into the water. The surging and cold river water quickly penetrated through the cracks in the car body, almost flooding the knees in the blink of an eye. Help, help. The people in the school bus, disregarding falling and feeling dizzy, quickly stood up, screamed in fear, and patted the car window. Chloe's face turned pale with fear and she was also shouting, even more afraid. She couldn't swim. I don't want to die, who can save me? The atmosphere of despair and terror spread rapidly in the car, and fear swept through everyone. Bad luck. The water was all over his waist, his clothes were wet, and David didn't seem to be in a life-threatening situation at all. He looked around and frowned. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Clark, did you save Luther? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Clark, did you save Luther? Schwa. Time seems to have slowed down. For a moment, the rippling water inside the school bus, the hair of the unstable girl dancing, the saliva sprayed out by the boy when he shouted in fear, and the floating water cup on the surface of the water seemed to slow down 100 times. David observed the situation and broke the glass beside him calmly. He swung his arms and came to the school bus at a speed like a torpedo coming out of the barrel. The front of the school bus was very high, and a person inside was panicked and no one noticed him. Being in the water, David didn't hold his breath and looked relaxed. The extermination of the Eternal Clan has a constitution that does not require eating, drinking water, or even breathing, and can survive in a cosmic vacuum of over -200 degrees. Not to mention just being underwater. The palms with distinct joints pressed against the front of the car, and David pushed it with one hand like pushing someone in front of him. In the turbulent river water, a school bus weighing more than 10 tons, comparable to a medium-sized bus, flew backwards like a shell fired by explosive force, breaking through the water surface and flying towards the shore with a splash of water. Bang! On the river surface, with a curve of over 10 meters, the school bus landed heavily on the grassy riverbank. The heavy rubber tires splashed mud everywhere, and the impact of the impact force caused the entire car to bounce. The glass window was shattered and debris splattered everywhere. Ah! The crowd in the school bus suddenly fell back and forth, covering their heads in fear. What happened? After a while, the glass fragments fell to the ground, and everyone stood up in disbelief, looking outside. Just now, I was still at the bottom of the dark and turbulent river, my life in danger. In the blink of an eye, I reached the sunny shore, and in my ears came the chirping of birds in the forest, so vivid and beautiful. Are we dreaming? They stared at each other in astonishment. Oh my God! The school bus driver who believed in the gods grabbed his hat off his head, looking shocked and looking into the river as if trying to find the figure of some angels. Is everything okay, Chloe? A voice came from around, and Chloe, who had survived the disaster, turned his head to look at him with a pale face. David, like her, was soaked all over, but his expression remained calm, and there was no trace of fear on his deep facial features. Does the Kent family have a big heart? No, it's okay. Passing by the Grim Reaper, Chloe couldn't recover from the miraculous scene and said in a daze. I thought the next time I came into contact with the light and the air, it would be heartbroken people who would bring a crane to retrieve the school bus loaded with our corpses from the bottom of the river. What exactly happened? This is a common question in the hearts of everyone on the school bus except David, who saved them. Did God hear their call? Let's get off the car quickly and get out of here, the school bus driver, who had just regained his senses, shouted loudly. The shore is slippery, and if the school bus slides into the river again, it would be a fatal joke. Wow! His clothes were wet and clinging to his body, and David twisted them, calmly leaving the school bus with the others who were still in shock, almost turning into their coffins. Something seems to have knocked us out of the river. Looking at the flattened front of the bus in surprise, as if it had been hit head-on by an Asian elephant, the burly school bus driver opened his mouth and couldn't close it for a long time. Is there a water monster in the river? A group of students had lingering palpitations, discussions, and constant surprises. Our school bus hit its head and it threw us out. Looking back into the surging river, it felt as if there was a huge monster lurking. Glancing at the marks he had left, David casually withdrew his gaze. Miaba, a mutated species of the Eternal Clan, possesses unimaginable power and endurance, as well as extraordinary recovery and agility. The skin is almost indestructible, especially when fighting against cold, heat, electricity, radiation, poison, aging, and diseases. His body strength is stronger than Jinjin's, and his terrifying strength is enough to kill the gods. Although only over 80% of the templates have been integrated now. But he is also unclear about his upper limit of power. Pickups, boulders. Lifting anything lightly floats. According to David's estimation, like an adult Superman, he could easily catch a plane falling from the sky, pull thousands of tons of steel warships, and lift a dozen or so residential buildings. However, there is no universal biological stance, and those things are likely to crumble and disintegrate. The school bus driver's claim that something crashed the school bus out of the river is purely a joke. When he was at the bottom of the river, David didn't even dare to push too hard, afraid of saving these people from suffocating pain and going to see God ahead of time. The crowd moved away from the riverbank and sat aside, waiting for rescue workers and parents to come over. The school bus rushed down the river once, was thrown ashore once, and experienced a severe rebound. Many people fell to their bodies, suffered fractures, and suffered head injuries. The school bus fell into the river and was inexplicably hit by an unknown creature, which is undoubtedly an extremely bizarre thing that some biologists and scientists scratch their heads and cannot understand. But in this small town, it cannot be said to be ordinary, and it is far from reaching the point where people's worldview is shattered. Since the meteorite shower more than 10 years ago, strange things have occurred frequently in this small town. What kind of vegetable that hasn't woken up for many years suddenly wakes up and disappears? In the dark woods at night, a giant wolf larger than a tiger can be seen wandering around. In the quiet and deserted late-night cemetery, there is a little girl carrying a furry bear, and when she turns her head, she disappears. The monster with strange speed and infinite power roared as it dug the mountain in the middle of the night. Countless. Upon hearing that the child had an accident and almost died at the bottom of the river, everyone's parents hurriedly rushed over with concern. Seeing her mother Martha driving over and parked on the roadside, David greeted her with some confusion. "David, are you okay?" Martha was anxious and ran over with a worried expression on her face. She looked at David up and down, wanting to see if he was injured anywhere. "Does the leg hurt? What about the chest? Did you choke?" "I'm fine, Mother." After patiently showing that there were no problems on his body several times, David reluctantly comforted his mother. He grabbed her colder hand and smiled. "Why are you here, Father?" He actually had long thought about showing his abilities to his parents. But unlike Clark, when he uses his strength, his skin turns purple and stripes grow on his chin, indicating a genetic mutation. He looks more like an alien than a Kryptonian, afraid that Jonathan and Martha will worry. "Just now the police called. Your brother had a car accident on another section of the bridge and fell into the river. Your father went to see him." Martha's expression was worried and strange. Strangely enough, both of her sons had accidents at noon on the same day, with one school bus slipping and crashing into the river, and the other being hit by a car. Car accident. Did he crash someone else's car? David is puzzled. Is the person driving okay? They won't be losing money, will they? The plot of the school bus falling into the river seems familiar. Why did Clark avoid it and still fall into the river? This is the power of fate. "David, Clark is your brother." Upon hearing her youngest son say this, Martha, who was originally worried, felt a little helpless. "I know. But his body can't be damaged by a truck, can it?" David spread his hand. "Even if it's smashed, as long as it's not dead, just put it in the sun and let it dry. See you in the afternoon, Chloe." After chatting with his mother for a few words, he said goodbye to Chloe. The mother and son turned around and walked towards the car, got on an old pickup truck that had served the Kent family for over a decade, and drove away. After David left, Chloe, draped in blankets by rescue workers, was shivering with cold. Suddenly, I saw a footprint not far away, with a piece of fresh green water grass crushed under it. Chloe had doubts in her eyes and looked left and right. Whose footprints are these? Before everyone could escape through the window, the school bus landed. Why are there water plants? Except for a few injured students and a few who pretended to be physically injured while playing at home and thought it was a good opportunity. The afternoon and the next day's classes continued without any delay. David couldn't help but marvel at the rough nerves and adaptability of the residents of this small town. Being baptized by meteorite rain is different. The next day, in the evening, David and Clark returned home from school. On the farm, at the entrance of the small courtyard, a brand new red pickup truck quietly parked there, its shiny paint reflecting the afterglow of the sunset, wrapped in a fireworks display, like a gift. Whose car is this? Seeing his mother who had just come out of the barn, Clark approached and asked with a smile. "Mom, is our family finally going to change cars?" "This is your car, Clark." "My. You saved Lex, the car he gave you." Martha frowned and took out a thank you letter, handing it to Clark. David heard yesterday that Clark was hit off the bridge by a runaway silver sedan, and as a result, he was fine. On the contrary, the owner of the sedan almost died in the river. Clark pulled him out of the river and saved the man's life, who was greatly surprised by his body. "Dear Clark. Drive carefully, don't be like me." Upon hearing these words, Clark eagerly opened the letter and read excitedly, "Thank you so much for yesterday. Lex Luthor. He has already figured out how to drive this beautiful pickup truck to school, and it will definitely make Lana pay more attention to him." David, who originally didn't pay much attention to this matter, heard the name and looked at the thank you letter. He frowned and his expression became strange. "Wait, Clark, did you save Lex Luthor? Yeah, what's wrong? The young Superman looked up, wondering why his younger brother had this expression. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Son, it's time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Son, it's time. Lex Luthor, one of Superman's lifelong opponents. After discovering Superman, he devoted himself to freeing the world from the threat of Superman. In his view, Superman locked humanity in a cradle of comfort, did not give humans the opportunity to grow in the face of crisis, and weakened the racial potential of humanity. Clark didn't save anyone yesterday, and during his youth, Lex Luthor fell into the river and most likely died. But he personally saved one of his biggest enemies in the future. Clark, just be happy. David spread his hands. Of course I am very happy. Clark smiled and said, Mom, where is the key to this car? David, do you want to go for a ride with me? He turned to his younger brother, and his depression in the past few days has also eased slightly. I can't wait to drive this car anymore. It's his first car in life, and given his family's financial situation, he thought he would still get it after he started working. Clark. Martha hesitated. The key is with your dad. Long. Beside the hay crusher, Jonathan was busy processing hay on the farm. Dad. Clark happily pulled David to the side, wanting to ask for the key. The young superhero opened his mouth, and Jonathan stopped the lawn shredder with a slightly heavy expression on his face. He said seriously, I know you really want it, but you can't accept it. He was still reminiscing about yesterday when Lex Luthor looked at the car that had been salvaged from the river and turned to Clark, who was unharmed. He was surprised and puzzled, as if he had seen a miracle that went against common sense and should not have existed. His face had a faint desire to explore and investigate. Just like an ambitious business owner discovering a unique new project. I don't know if it's an illusion, he has a bad premonition. Why? I saved him. Clark was puzzled. This doesn't mean you can accept others' expensive thanks with peace of mind. Here's a new car for you, Dad. I can drive an old car. It's not related to this, Jonathan said quickly as he saw his son's displeasure on his face. A pickup truck, it's nothing to the Lex family at all. David actually agrees with Clark's statement. Luthor Group is one of the globally renowned business groups, and even Smallville, a remote town near the metropolis, has the Luthor family's fertilizer plant as its pillar industry. There are over 2,000 people working for the Lex family in the town. Clark saved Lex Luthor, and a pickup truck was not expensive for the life of an heir to a wealthy conglomerate. Listen to my son, we can't just want whatever we want in life, it's normal. Jonathan wants to patiently explain. Normal. I've had enough of normal. Clark's recent depression has accumulated and finally erupted, interrupting his father's words. He can do a lot, he can do more than just look, he can do the best with anything he does. But in order to be normal, he had to hide himself and could only be an inconspicuous subordinate, standing by the playground with a sour heart, watching his crush in someone else's arms and passionately kissing them. Is this called normal? Avoiding his father's hand that wanted to grab his shoulder, he angrily walked to the lawn shredder, turned on the machine, and with a deafening buzzing sound, his arms plunged into the constantly working chopper. Kaka. Father, tell me. Like encountering an indestructible high-density alloy, a cutter blade, gears breaking, and a burst of black smoke from the grass crusher, it stopped working. Clark. Even though Jonathan knew his son was tough and sturdy, he still screamed in surprise and hurriedly went up to pull out his son's arm from inside. Only the clothes were crushed, and there was not even a red mark on Clark's arm. I know you're amazing, Clark. Have you ever thought that repairing a lawn shredder would cost money? Looking at Clark, who was in his adolescence, David interjected calmly. He vented his anger for a while, and only the result of the grass crusher being injured was achieved. Father, have you seen it? I was born with an abnormality. Upon hearing his brother's words, Clark became even more angry, his voice excited, and he couldn't accept his situation. Mother Martha hurriedly rushed over upon hearing the commotion. Seeing this scene, she guessed what had happened and exchanged a worried glance with her husband Jonathan. "Perhaps it's time, son." Jonathan sighed and wearily took off the gloves he used for work. "This day will always come." "What?" Clark suddenly had an ominous premonition. "Come with me." He turned around with heavy footsteps, letting Clark follow. Then he glanced at his youngest son and hesitated for a moment. "David, you also have the right to know the truth as a member of this family." Although David is his and Martha's biological son, Clark is just a baby found from outer space, and they are of different races. But kind Jonathan and Martha never had a difference in their hearts, both of them were his sons in his heart. "I know there are some things that cannot be kept from you forever, especially after discovering, Clark, that you are naturally extraordinary and possess powers that humans cannot imagine." A rundown car repair shop. A worker with blonde hair and strong physique listened to the dynamic and flamboyant death rock, standing beside the car and reaching into the car to twist the key. The dashboard lit up, the engine successfully started, and the worker chewing gum showed a proud smile, closing the front hood of the car. Just as they were about to take a break, the workers suddenly noticed a thin figure standing in the shadow of the store entrance, resembling a ghost. "Damn it, you're scaring me to death." With a low curse, the worker suddenly felt a bit familiar with the person in the shadow. "Do I know you?" He squinted his eyes and recognized the newcomer, walking up. "You look like that scarecrow. What's your name?" "It seems like you're called Jerome." Jerome, with black hair and a thin figure, looked at him coldly with sunken cheeks like a skeleton, without saying a word. "I heard that you injured your head in that meteorite shower and remained unconscious." As he spoke, a worker who used to be a football player at Smallville High School, his hands smeared with oil and looked contemptuously at the opponent's clothes. "Finally willing to leave the hospital bed. Look at your little body." Before finishing speaking, a strong electric current shot out from Jerome's shoulder where it touched. A burnt smell spread in the air. The worker suddenly flew backwards 3 or 4 meters, knocked over a tool rack, and fell heavily to the ground. "Monster!" He lifted his hand, which was electrocuted and painful, and his face changed dramatically as he retreated. "Listen, that was already over a decade ago." The worker immediately realized why the other party was here and wanted to dispel his desire for revenge, shouting in pain. "That's just a game. Game." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. I will bring Clark back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. I will bring Clark back, game. Jerome seemed to hear some joke and raised his palm. There is a terrifying scar left by a steel nail piercing through the palm of the hand. After being crucified, Jesus took on all the sins of humanity and ascended to heaven. Sting. As he spoke, his palm emitted a fierce and dazzling electric current that wrapped around it, causing the workers to widen their eyes and shiver with fear. 17 years later, I will return to this world, and God has given me this ability to wash away your sins. Since you love games so much. Now, let's play another game. Jerome walked up step by step, as if death was approaching. Ah ah. Electric light illuminates the window, accompanied by piercing screams. After more than 10 minutes, a thin figure put on a hood and left coldly. In the car repair shop, a body that had been brutally tortured and electrocuted lay quietly on the ground, no longer boastful or contemptuous, huddled together like a baby. Caca. Jonathan opened the door of the barn. The smell of old and rotten rice mixed with moisture spread across the surface. The classic scene, David already knows what's going to happen. Clark is about to learn about his background. He rarely restrained his casual expression and looked at Clark beside him, feeling a hint of concern in his heart, unsure if he could accept the truth. Due to David's presence, especially since he was just born, Jonathan and Martha have no suitable reason to adopt another child. The couple secretly adopted Clark and publicly claimed that they were siblings. "What are you talking about, Father?" An inexplicable panic gripped Clark's heart, and he began to regret not getting angry with his parents just now. Father and mother are also good for him and want to protect him. He knows everything, why didn't he control it just now, Clark? This is something your parents left for you, Clark. Jonathan was in an inconspicuous old box, taking out something with a heavy expression and a hint of sadness. His voice was muffled and he turned around to hand it over to Clark. A thing resembling a long stone seal, black in color, with an S embossed on the head. Parents. Clark couldn't believe what he had heard, his face turned pale, and he looked at the long black object, afraid to reach out and touch it, just like facing a fragile bubble, afraid of breaking it with just one hand. Some things are even harder to retrieve. Father, this joke is not funny. Why is my father lying but his heart doesn't accelerate? The key to a lonely fortress. David frowned and withdrew his gaze from the key. Watching Clark's reaction, I was worried that he would be overwhelmed by this sudden news. For ordinary people, suddenly learning within a day that their beloved parents are not actually biological parents and have no blood relationship is enough to be unbearable. If I find out again that I am an alien. David suddenly remembered a sentence from someone with pale and crazy skin. To drive someone crazy, just give them a bad day. Joker. Shouldn't it be? His eyelids trembled. It's really a fatal joke to develop a clown superhero. Gia. Opening the cellar again, Jonathan led his two sons down and uncovered something covered by a canvas. After the dust was flying, a small spacecraft appeared in the sight of the three people, with a streamlined shape and the size of a cradle, appearing to be able to ride only one baby. No. Watching the spaceship that shouldn't have appeared on the farm, Clark was struck by lightning and stepped back 2 steps. Father, don't treat me like this. He had a stiff expression, with almost a hint of pleading, as the abandoned child looked towards Jonathan. Clark, actually you are the son adopted by Martha and me. Looking at his son's reaction, he felt very uncomfortable in his heart, but as he spoke, Jonathan couldn't stop. Long pain is better than short pain, and he gritted his teeth to tell the truth. You come from extraterrestrial space, and we found you in that meteorite shower more than 10 years ago. Clark felt like he was stepping in the clouds, his head dizzy, and he felt like everything was about to leave him. What about David? Suddenly he saw David, as if grabbing a life-saving straw, and quickly asked. Don't tell him, David. Is my and Martha's biological son. Seeing that there was hardly any shock on David's face, Jonathan couldn't understand. He thought he was still thinking that everything was fake, but at this moment, he didn't care about David. He hesitated for a moment and revealed the cruel and hurtful truth. No. All of this is fake, I will never accept it. Gritting his teeth and roaring like an injured beast, Clark, whose eyes were red, turned around and ran away almost crazily. He wants to escape this lie, escape this heartbreaking reality. Schwa. At a supersonic speed, Clark fled from the cellar and disappeared. Son. Jonathan was eager to catch up, but as a mortal father, how could he catch up with the son of Krypton? He had no choice but to stop at the entrance of the cellar and look at the empty barn, just like his heart. Clark will figure it out, father. Watching his father's disheartened appearance, David couldn't help but be touched. He had never seen Jonathan, who was stubborn all over, show such an expression before. He stepped forward to support his father and comforted him. I don't believe he will abandon our family. David, why aren't you surprised at all? Jonathan turned back wearily. We only have a few houses at home, and Clark is so unusual. In fact, David is not sure why Clark hasn't discovered the spaceship in the cellar for over a decade, especially when he was a child who loved to explore curiously and climb up and down. He sneaked in here to check when he was a few years old. After all, it's a real spacecraft. I understand. Jonathan looked as if he had aged a few years, doubting whether his recent actions were correct. He was supported and sat down on the steps, accidentally patting his son's shoulder. David, my son, you did a great job. He had a hoarse voice and looked at his son, who had been particularly sensible since childhood and had not shown any unusual looks because of it. Clark, where he comes from and whether he is an alien is not important. What's important is that he is our family and a brother who grew up with you. Don't blame him for his intense reaction, he just couldn't accept it for a moment. I'll go find him back. David frowned as he saw his father talking in such a daze, getting up to leave. If. Jonathan paused and advised, if Clark doesn't want to come back for now, don't force it. Within a day, he learned 2 bad news in succession, and his past life based on Kent's son was denied. He could imagine the impact on his eldest son. I will. David nodded to his father. But I don't think so in my heart, I secretly said. If we can't convince Clark. At the moment, we have to give Clark a face-breaking correction punch to calm him down. Sign the contract. Starting today, Purple Potato will change twice a day. Thank you for your support. End of this chapter. Chapter 8 is about me overthinking, 3K. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 is about me overthinking, 3K, a bar with bright lights and vibrant lights. After escaping home, Clark walked in as a walking corpse. Unable to accept reality, he now wanted to get drunk and forget everything. People say that when you get drunk, you can think nothing. You are only 18 years old, and the state government's law prohibits the sale of your liquor. The bartender glanced at Clark's ID and said, "Do you want to drink beer? As long as it's wine, it's good." Retrieve the identification documents, and the lost Clark urged the bartender to bring them up as soon as possible. On the dance floor, men and women danced passionately, while someone in the booth was excitedly playing a drinking game. Everything that was noisy and lively had nothing to do with him. Clark felt lost and lonely, like a lone wolf lost with a pack of wolves. An indescribable discomfort fills the heart. Is everything fake? Recalling the scenes of my past life with my parents and younger brother. He never belongs to that family, and he doesn't even belong to this planet where he grew up. When he was a child, Clark once wondered why others couldn't lift a truck, and falling from several floors would result in injuries. His parents and younger brother were also different from him, and now he has the answer. Because he has no blood relationship with his father or younger brother. I'm just an alien monster picked up by my parents. At the dimly lit bar, Clark's eyes turned red and he looked absent-mindedly at Clark Kent's name on his ID card. He doesn't have the surname Kent at all, and even his name shouldn't be in this form. There should be a name that sounds strange to Earthlings. Billions of people on Earth, not a single one is his fellow race, not a single place is his hometown. Why? Excited and extremely unstable, Clark clenched his fists in anger. Is this God's prank on him? Why is he not an Earthling? Why can't he be a family member connected by blood with his parents and younger brother? He wished that everything his father told him today was fake. Tomorrow morning, he could still taste his mother's carefully made apple pie, ride the school car with his younger brother to school, and come back to help his father with some farm work. Life was dull and fulfilling. Why did my life suddenly break? Suddenly telling him the bad news, how can he go back to that home and enjoy the love of his parents with peace of mind? Confused and angry, Clark suddenly had an impulse to punch and disrupt his release. At this moment, Clark put one hand on his shoulder. It's really you. Clark turned his head and saw Whitney and a few team members holding beer in their hands, with a mischievous smile on their faces, as if they had seen a weak rabbit's hunting dog, vaguely surrounding him. Clark, why are you drinking alone here? Whitney held a beer in one hand and wrapped her arms around Clark's neck in the other, as if very intimate, but her arms were secretly exerting force. Whitney, don't bother me now. To his surprise, Clark, whose neck was supposed to be sore from being pinched, remained motionless, his body cast like steel, and he opened Whitney's hand. Although someone just wanted to disrupt something to vent and provoke, the kind-hearted future Superman, who had been well taught by the Jonathan couple for over a decade, held back and did not fight back. I have good news for you, Clark. Whitney was stumbling and his beer spilled on the ground, causing him to feel embarrassed in front of everyone and become extremely angry. I have decided that this year's scarecrow will be you. The gays signaled several rugby players to put down their beer together and forcefully take Clark away. I said, don't provoke me. The noisy rock music in the bar penetrated into Clark's ears, and he suddenly stood up and grabbed Whitney's collar, his eyes filled with anger, almost unable to control his desire to take action. But suddenly, Whitney's collar was torn open, revealing a familiar green crystal necklace. Radiation belonging to kryptonite enveloped him. Ah! Clark's divine power quickly dissipated, his expression unbearable and painful. The hand close to the kryptonite even had abnormal blood vessels protruding green, as if poisoned. In the flickering light, Whitney didn't notice this and punched the weak man to the ground, disdainfully tidying up his clothes. So what if I provoke you, Clark? He crouched down and grabbed Clark in the opposite direction, his voice low and filled with jealousy and malice. I have noticed the way you look at my girlfriend for a long time, and I know everything you're thinking in your heart. Who do you think she is? The high school rugby tournament is approaching, and Lana hands over her meteorite crystal necklace, which she has worn since childhood, to her boyfriend as a token of her affection, in order to bless him for overcoming obstacles and winning the championship in the competition, and being discovered by scouts. As a result, Clark once again tasted the power of kryptonite. Do you really want her necklace? Noticing the discomfort, Clark kept staring at the necklace around his neck, thinking he was jealous and sour. Whitney sneered and hung the necklace around his neck, humiliating him severely. Then I'll give it to you. You can only be so close to Lana. Take him away. He stood up to greet a few rugby players and lifted the more painful Clark away through the back door. There are many people here, and Whitney is planning to take Clark to a remote cornfield and teach him a good lesson. I will teach you to put aside your delusions. Suddenly, a voice seemed to have no emotional fluctuations. Where are you taking Clark? Whitney. David. Whitney was surprised to see a figure slowly walking with both hands in the pockets of a brown jacket, and then sneered. Since you took the initiative to deliver it to your door, I'll take you with me. Let Clark see how he implicated his younger brother due to inappropriate thoughts. David remained calm and didn't seem to hear what he was going to do. David, hurry up. Clark, whose body was awkwardly propped up and weak enough to even stand still, quickly shouted when he saw his brother enduring pain, you can't beat them. Whitney and his team of 5 were all physically strong rugby team members, and he didn't want to see his younger brother being bullied. Urgent +18 from Clark, regret +13. I thought you might not be able to handle today's situation and fall into another path, causing some trouble for your family. Ignoring Whitney and the others, David looked at him and raised his eyebrows slowly. Now it seems like I overthought it, Clark. Even facing a few high school students holding kryptonite, they can still eat their fill. Up. Seeing his attitude of ignoring himself, Whitney couldn't help but get angry. Show him your prowess. 2 tall and muscular rugby players with fierce faces, one on the left and the other on the right, rushed forward like wolves and punched each other. The commotion on this side of the bar finally caught the attention of some people. Many of them looked over and clapped their hands, cheering and not finding it too big to watch the excitement. Okay, let's fight. Fighting has always occurred frequently in places like bars. David stood in place, swaying his body to avoid the fist of the first person who hit, and his backhand hit with lightning speed. Bang! The rugby player's eyes were bulging and his face turned red like a cooked lobster. He knelt down in pain, covering his stomach and spitting out a mouthful of saliva. Another one rushed forward with his fist raised, and David turned his elbow beautifully. He felt like he had been hit in the head by a baseball bat and fell uncontrollably to the ground, unconscious. Oh! In less than 2 seconds, 2 opponents were solved in an instant. Some people in the bar were surprised and their eyelids twitched, applauding and cheering. Pretty is this young man, so skilled that he is a professional fighter. Shock +8 from Clark, shock +9. David ignored the emotional reminders that were often overlooked by him, and Whitney stood still, looking incredulously at the 2 team members who had been beaten to the ground. You. Clark was even more surprised, he never knew his brother and this side. Let's go together. Whitney and 2 team members who threw Clark to the ground rushed towards David together. Bang, bang, bang. David's footsteps danced lightly like butterflies, and the 3 of them didn't touch a corner of his clothes. His fists were as powerful as bee stings, and he casually took 3 punches and landed on them with ease. The 3 of them collapsed on the ground with bruises and swollen faces. Impossible. Whitney covered his chest in excruciating pain, his ribs seemed to be broken, and he gritted his teeth and struggled to get up and charge towards David. Just a guy who dares not participate in any campus activities. Just lie down, Whitney. As soon as he got up, David kicked him over like an adult bullying a child, casually crossing over him who couldn't get up again and walking towards Clark. As long as you apply too much force, your skin color will appear. However, dealing with these few people requires no more strength than ordinary people. The onlookers at the bar looked at him walking over, didn't want to cause trouble, and all retreated to make way for him. Can retired members of the Navy SEALs be so skilled? Where did you learn to fight? Die. David. The Kryptonians were exposed to kryptonite for a long time and even faced life-threatening situations. Clark's blue blood vessels in his neck burst abnormally, and his face turned pale. He endured the pain and asked in surprise. He never knew that his younger brother had such a formidable fighting ability. On TV. David calmly replied, pulling off the necklace from his neck. Electricity. On TV. Clark didn't expect such an answer. Seeing that his brother was fine, he finally stopped holding on and his eyes rolled over. The necklace was put into his pocket, and David looked relaxed as he lifted the tall Clark. He turned around and left the bar, and everyone gave way. Even if someone's fight affected business, the owner of the bar didn't dare to ask David to stay. Step out a distance. Under the cold moonlight, I arrived on the deserted road. Clark on David's shoulder woke up in a daze, realizing that it was his way home and struggling. Let me down, David, I don't want to go back. There is something at home that I owe 1,000 words for. I will make up for it in the future. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. I am for you, Clark. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. I am for you, Clark. After Clark and David left, Whitney, who was knocked to the ground, and a few rugby players struggled to get up after a while. A few people hit each other without even touching their clothes. Under the ridicule of everyone, they awkwardly helped each other and left. Not long after they left, a thin figure walked out of the bar and gazed at the few people leaving in baseball suits, with a cold look in their eyes. It's not urgent, there's plenty of time. He murmured and returned to the bar to continue drinking slowly, occasionally glancing at a black burly man picking up girls in the corner of the bar, with no expression on his face, as if looking at a dead person. The original plan cannot be disrupted. As for those equally bad high school students from the school team, he remembers that tomorrow night is the spring dance party at the small town high school. I haven't attracted anyone's attention at a ball before, but this time it's different, Jerome sneered. He will be the most dazzling one at the ball. Put me down, David. Clark woke weakly and struggled to get off David's shoulder. I don't want to go back. He hasn't figured out how to go back and face his parents yet. What, 18-year-old Clark wants to run away from home. David thinks there is a very simple solution to this matter, and there is no need to pull back and forth with affectation. He raised his hand and struck a knife. Pop. After being hit on the back of the neck, Clark looked back at his younger brother in confusion, not understanding what he was going to do. I'm using less strength. Seeing this situation, David smacked his mouth. Despite the lack of sunlight at the moment, Clark gradually began to recover from the kryptonite radiation. Bang! He added another blow. The terrifying force was enough to smash a tank with one hand's knife, and the air waves spread for more than 10 meters, like a strong wind invading. The weeds on both sides of the road shook violently. Clark passed out with a flip of his eyes. It's done. The skin color recovered on the dim road, and David carried the unconscious Clark back to the farm. The couple inside are still waiting for their 2 children to come back, at the warm and bright door of the house. Before entering, he took out a green glowing kryptonite necklace and circled Clark's face, putting a layer of makeup on him. Suffering from kryptonite radiation, Clark, who had almost recovered, was once again in a coma and his expression became painful. His face was weak and pale, as if he was seriously ill. After feeling almost done, David satisfactorily put away the kryptonite. Kryptonians must be exposed to kryptonite at least on a monthly or even yearly basis in order to be in danger of their lives. No problem in the short term, especially since Clark is not an ordinary Kryptonian. Of course, I'm doing it for your own good, Clark. He is not for any information to suggest pain from Clark +3+2 or the like. David smiled and walked in carrying Clark. Oh my God, David, what's wrong with your brother? Seeing this scene, Martha was so scared that she covered her mouth. Clark, why did you faint? Jonathan's expression was unbelievable. Clark was even stronger than a cow when he was a child and had never been sick or injured. The couple saw him for the first time with a pale face and an unconscious coma. I'm not sure, it seems that Clark's super strong physique is problematic. David said without blushing or jumping. Make him lie down quickly. Since childhood, my son carefully picked up Clark from his shoulder, and Jonathan laid him flat on the sofa. Martha quickly poured a glass of water and came to the sofa, anxiously calling out her son's name. Clark. Both the couple were a bit flustered. Because, despite reaching middle age, the two have never encountered a situation where their son is sick. Feeling a jolt, Clark woke up in a daze. My parents anxiously gathered around me, with a strong concern in their eyes that couldn't be dispelled. They were cautious and didn't dare to shake him forcefully. Father, mother. Returning to his warm and familiar home, he looked at his parents gathered in front of him, feeling a bit dazed. I almost forgot when my father had white hair growing in his hair, his face becoming weathered, his body no longer so strong, and my mother's eyes wrinkled by time. Her flaccid skin pierced his eyes like a knife. I only remember when I was a child, my favorite thing was to ride around my father's neck and let him run around. I was not interested in the passing game that other fathers and sons liked to play, which made my father very helpless and could only play with David and the other 2. By the way, there was still a period of time when he enjoyed eating corn hot dogs and always insisted on having his mother cook them for him to eat. Scenes from the past came to mind. Clark's nose seemed to be uncontrollably sore from being punched, wasting his parents' youth. My parents picked me up from the meteorite shower and raised me as hard as their own son, even caring about my psychology and emotions more than David. Never asked me for anything, never thought about getting anything from me even though he could easily use his abilities to package him as a promising rugby or football youth star to earn a large sum of money, without having to bury himself in endless work on the farm. His parents never did that. Even if I keep hiding my abilities just to protect myself, I still get tired of it. Clark, what's wrong with you? My son was in a daze and didn't speak for a long time. Martha was even more anxious, afraid that he might have some health problems. Mother. Clark's eyes turned red and he suddenly stood up full of guilt. stretching out his arms to tightly embrace the couple who loved him the most in the world. "I was wrong, Father. No matter what identity, it cannot change that I am your son. I used to be so foolish. Even though my parents didn't care about his identity, I gave him the best and warmest love in the world for over a decade, just like I did with my own son. But he became conflicted about this after learning the truth. As long as you come back, Clark." Jonathan felt a stone fall from his heart, and a slight smile appeared on his face. He exchanged a pleased glance with Martha and also hugged his son. "It seems that someone gave up running away from home." David leaned against the door frame and patted his palm with a slightly playful expression. Clark remembered feeling a bit ashamed before and said to his younger brother. Happiness +14 from Clark, gratitude +7, shame +5. "You always see things better than I do, David." Jonathan and Martha also acknowledged this, as their youngest son is intelligent and mature, never requiring a couple to worry. "Clark, are you okay?" The warm family atmosphere returned to its past, and Martha remembered her son's pale face just now. "Why do you feel like you're sick?" "I'm fine, except for the back of my head." Hiss. Clark touched the back of his head, as if he had been hit by a rocket falling from the sky. He gasped in pain and looked up at David in confusion. "David, you. Did he become too weak by Lana's necklace? How could I be beaten so badly by my younger brother? It shouldn't be. It seems a bit heavy again this time." Thoughts flashed through his heart, and David calmly changed the topic. Perhaps Clark was injured by Whitney and the others. "Hurt. Clark, did you get beaten?" Clark, who was about to ask David what was going on, was immediately questioned and concerned by Jonathan and Martha, and he couldn't find another opportunity to ask David for a moment. Under the starry sky, there is a huge warehouse on the farm where machinery and tools are stored. On the second floor, with an outdoor window, Clark explained the whole story to his parents and finally calmed them down. He didn't suffer any harm. At least not from the Whitney group. The fresh breeze blows, and the wheat fields on the farm rustle, making people feel comfortable and peaceful. Everything seems like before. Clark sat by the window, gazing through an astronomical telescope at a clear distance of 1 kilometer, with a smile unconsciously appearing at the corner of his mouth. In front of a house through a telescope, a beautiful figure with black hair sat on the steps and hallway, blowing the evening breeze and writing an English report. Most importantly, the green necklace disappeared from the neck of that figure, which made him unable to help but imagine suddenly in sight, a figure approached Lana's house secretly, took a few photos of Lana behind the grass, put away the camera, deliberately shook the grass, and nervously and shyly put down a gift box and ran away. Lana walked over in confusion and opened the gift box. A few colorful and beautiful butterflies with green shimmering dust flew out gracefully, like scenes from fairy tales. She covered her mouth in surprise and looked at the street, looking for the person who had given her a gift. A pursuer. Clark's heart is a bit sour. Lana's charm is really not average. He is going to see who the gift giver is and whether he knows him or not. I remember someone asked their mother for $300 and said they were very interested in astronomy. Suddenly, a voice came and Clark was startled and turned around to look. David slowly walked up the stairs with a strange and unexpected expression. "To be honest, at first I saw you looking out with this thing, thinking that after learning about your background, you were searching for your hometown lonely and sad among the stars. But the result?" Looking at the astronomical telescope that was aimed directly at a certain building, he raised his eyebrows. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Everyone is guilty. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Everyone is guilty. Although I am inevitably confused about where it comes from, this is undoubtedly my home. Upon hearing David's words, Clark fell silent and spoke with unprecedented seriousness, as if speaking to him as if speaking to himself. "I am very certain of this. David, you and your father and mother are my family. This will never change. There used to be things that were taken for granted, but after almost losing them today, Clark suddenly realized that he should do everything in his power to cherish and protect those things, such as family ties, such as family. Thank you for today's matter, brother. Don't expect to say a few good words that won't tell my mother what you're doing with this thing all day. Clark, who has always been a bit introverted, expressed his feelings so straightforwardly that David couldn't adapt for a moment and looked into the distance. This astronomical telescope was built to help humanity observe the lofty and vast universe of stars. Instead of letting people use it to peep at their crush, in order to have some dreamy material, David, I have no such thoughts. Clark was frantically trying to explain that he didn't have that kind of thought. I understand. However, David, who was flustered by a single sentence, did not give him this opportunity and left behind an obvious perfunctory sentence before turning and leaving. Urgent +7 from Clark, embarrassed +4. Today is different from before, and many things have happened one after another. Kent and Clark have both experienced intense emotional ups and downs, and David has gained many emotional points as a result, and his integration has improved a bit. Template fusion degree 81%, 83%. The later the template goes, the more difficult it is to improve fusion, and at the same time, a little bit of fusion can bring stronger power than before. The morning breeze blew over Smallville High School. A pair of sneakers came and went briskly, and the girls whispered a few shy laughter from time to time. The boys raised their chin and boasted to their friends. Unlike previous campus life, students have faces full of excitement and anticipation. Tonight is the spring ball. You didn't take the school bus with David again today, Clark. Pete asked Clark what was going on. There was something, I saved someone and he gave me a gift, but he couldn't accept it, Clark explained. I went to return that gift this morning. This morning, without any complaints, he obediently followed his father's instructions and went to Lex's estate to have a polite conversation with Lex Luthor before returning the pickup truck. What gift? Pete is about to ask further questions that interest him. That necklace is very important to me. A faint voice came, and Lana's face, not far away, was sad and ugly. Whitney next to her had a blue and purple nose wrapped in bandages, and her forehead was red and swollen. She kept comforting her girlfriend, explaining in her mouth. What's wrong with Whitney's face? Pete was puzzled. Perhaps you got drunk and fell down. Clark awkwardly explained as he glanced at David with a disdainful expression. That necklace was carved from the meteorite left by my parents after they died in the meteorite rain when I was a child. My aunt left it for me to remember my parents, but you lost it. At the bar. Someone got drunk and deliberately caused trouble. We had a fight with them and after the fight, we found that the necklace had disappeared. Lana, I promised to find it back. Clark's extraordinary hearing allowed him to hear the conversation between the two, and he frowned at Whitney's lying and deceiving behavior towards Lana. Upon hearing the origin of the Lana necklace again, he hesitated for a moment. He gritted his teeth and looked at David, pleading with his eyes and opening his mouth to say something. You're really kind, Clark. David, feeling somewhat helpless, had already guessed what he wanted to say and turned around to leave. Although the super hearing of Miaba's physique is far inferior to that of Kryptonians, this distance is not a problem for him. It goes without saying that although Clark was reluctant to have the opportunity to speak freely with his dream lover. But I still decided to return the necklace to Lana. Even if the necklace goes back, the emotional rift between Lana and Whitney will immediately disappear, it will help Whitney, and he will also lose the opportunity. Being overly kind is truly a superhero of the future. David can only evaluate this. Before the dance in the evening. Clark has been pestering David, wanting to demand that necklace. David handled it perfunctorily. Why do we have to send back the obtained kryptonite? Additionally, Clark has been requesting that emotional points be recorded. At the ball. Chloe, who was not invited by her dance partner, had to form a group with Pete to avoid embarrassment. As for David and Clark, neither of them cares about these things. Melodious music, bright dance floor in the middle. A pair of young men and women in formal attire, their eyes met and their faces were filled with smiles, like birds dancing slowly. Beside the long dining table, David casually took a dim sum and tasted it. "Look at that, your dream lover is dancing around the waist of another man." He ordered the most eye-catching pear in the center with a fork and chuckled to Clark, who was pleading continuously next to him. "Even so, do you still want to return the necklace?" Clark looked at the center of the dance floor, as if he had eaten a lemon with a sour heart. Even though she was a bit angry, Lana, who was unaware, did not refuse Whitney's dance invitation on the spot, under the premise that Whitney had lied and had completely taken responsibility of herself. Under the envious gaze of the crowd, the two of them looked affectionately into each other's eyes and danced slowly, becoming the most dazzling pair in the middle of the dance floor. "The person I like dresses up to attend the ball, but it's not for him. He is just an inconspicuous transparent person standing on the edge of the ball." "That's Lana's necklace, David." Clark's tone couldn't hide his disappointment, but he still said. David somewhat convinced Clark and didn't want to add insult to injury to the poor him at the moment. "Okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. Anyway, it's okay if you don't have a chance, Lana is not suitable for you." Clark's face lit up with joy, and upon hearing these words, he wanted to ask why he said so. Suddenly, the fire alarm was triggered on the ceiling above the school auditorium, and water poured down the pipes like pouring rain. "Ah! Where did you get the water from?" "The fire alarm has been triggered, where did it catch fire?" With a series of screams, everyone in the auditorium suddenly turned into drowned rats, their exquisite makeup was watered, their waxed hairstyles collapsed, and everyone was in a state of embarrassment and panic. The dim sum on his hand was watered through. David looked at the wet clothes on his body, and his face became ugly. "Is it an accident?" Clark's gaze quickly searched, but he didn't see any fire or even smoke. "Is the fire alarm broken? Or was the overall control outside triggered?" Bang! At this moment, the entrance of the auditorium was suddenly kicked open. Clear footsteps rang out. Sting! God has said that every person is born with original sin. In the silence of the whole room, a thin figure with a hood walked in, revealing his cold face. A dazzling electric current resembling a silver snake shot out of his hands, and a burnt smell emanated from the air. "Although my goal this time is not for all of you. Amidst the bewildered gazes of the crowd, he paused and forcefully pressed his hand, accompanied by a powerful electric current capable of melting steel, onto a damp ground. "I don't mind helping you wash away your sins in advance. Sorry, the update was a bit late because there were more updates and I still owe half of the chapter yesterday." End of this chapter.